So you've developed your first MVP, your minimum viable product, or what we sometimes refer to as your minimum viable proof. And you've collected market feedback. But what comes next? It's not a viable business until you have paying customers, and this takes iteration. Many new entrepreneurs want to jump straight to developing a final product, or giving up on the idea entirely. But the truth is, the MVP is just a first iteration in a much longer process toward getting your product ready for market. You won't get it right the first time, but keep at it. From your first prototype or pilot, you have to ask yourself, what parts do people feel really solve their needs? What parts of this are unnecessary? And what important needs does my customer have that still aren't being solved? In order to get customers to use your offering, you're asking them to change from how they currently do things. So in every iteration of your MVP, you need to test to see if your value is enough that customers are willing to pay for it, and to change how they go about finding, acquiring, and using your product. There are more costs to a customer than money in adopting a solution to their needs. There's time to find it, time to learn to use it, and time to evaluate it. And time is a very valuable resource that people are reluctant to give up. A key test that I enjoy for testing if the MVP has enough value is called the cry test. It may sound funny, but ideally, individuals should like your product or service so much that if you allow them to test it and then take it away from them, they'd get really sad and possibly even cry about it. While this test got its name from testing children's toys, it works across any field to determine features in your product that individuals feel strongly solves their needs and wants. To have a compelling potential business, you need to have at least 40% of the test users be distraught if you were to not allow them to continue using your offering. What happens if your MVP isn't as successful as you hoped, though? You shouldn't automatically be discouraged and assume that your company has no potential. Rather, you should take a look at the feedback you're receiving from customers on their core values and reluctance to change behaviors. You may need to adjust the scope of the need you're solving, find different customers who have the need more, or adjust how you fill that need. An example of a launch company that had a first MVP that may not have been as successful as planned is Vivere. Vivere sought to help older adults combat social isolation, something which they had identified was a true need from interviews with the older adults and their children. Vivere first assumed that they could solve social isolation in older adults by finding them events to attend, assuming the largest issue was their lack of knowledge of these events in their area. After sending out an email listing events for older adults in the area, they received feedback that the older adults weren't interested in going. So the team went back to their market research to discover what the actual problem or need they wanted to solve would be. Vivere found that the burning need older adults experienced wasn't the inability to find something to do, but it was rather the fear and anxiety associated with doing something new when you may be on your own and not know anyone. For Vivere's next MVP, they tested to see if older adults would be willing to pay to meet other older adults with similar interests and attend events of common interests with high school-aged volunteers, since their market research had showed that older adults enjoy working with young individuals. The team took 3 older adults, all interested in art and who had never met, to an art gallery. All of them were excited to be repeat customers, requesting more trips. From there, they trialed different types of events and arrangements, organized by them and by others, with and without volunteers, and with and without providing information about the other older adults in the group with whom they would have shared interests. All of this iteration was necessary to allow them to hone in on the most important aspects of the experience so that they could scale it to reach more people. The important thing about an MVP is to test for feedback early and often, so you can adjust your company to best solve the needs of the customer. Customers will often behave much differently than you might expect, or than they say they would when it's just theoretical. Theoretically, I'd love to go to the gym more. Even if your MVP gets positive feedback and customers respond as you expected, that's only the first step. You need to test a more integrated version of your product and test that customers will seek and buy it. Creating your first MVP is a huge step, allowing you to test your assumptions for feedback. Great entrepreneurs are constantly testing and iterating, so keep running your tests to find your ideal product market fit.